Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. I'm actually shooting this on Thursday, so it's a little earlier than I normally would during the week. There is a plant symposium in Raleigh this weekend. It's a yearly occurrence that the J.C. Ralston Arboretum and Juniper Level Botanic Garden put on. Tony Avent and Mark Wethington put together every year, and I always go to that, and a lot of plant friends from all over the country coming in, great speakers at that event every year. So that'll be fun this weekend, and so that's why I'm jumping on this a little early because that's on Friday and Saturday. There, the Learn to Garden video series and the weekly garden planner. Thank you to everyone who has purchased those two items, one or the other or both in some cases. Thank you very much for that. Lots of new content coming for both of those, and they'll be referenced a couple times during the question and answer, because sometimes the answers to some of these questions are in those. They both have discounts for subscribers to the channel down below the channel if you're interested in either one of those. There are new t-shirts coming, and I'm hoping to be able to put some photos right here, right now, because I'm filming this on Thursday morning. Those t-shirts are supposed to be here this afternoon. So 3 new design t-shirts. They'll be over on the website regardless if I'm not able to get these photos up on this video of showing them off, but there's one that includes Holly. I think you can see her in the background back here as well. So anyway, new t-shirts. We went down to Athens, Georgia for a really quick 2.5 day trip, did some video content at Ram and Tom Giberson's beautiful garden in Athens, and then went over to Piccadilly Farms. They have this really interesting, like 2-acre wooded garden that was planted about 30 years ago, and so very, very large mature specimens in that garden. Really interesting place that we just stayed there overnight and then videoed in the morning. So that video should be up before you're watching this, or I have not had time to edit that video yet. And details on the upcoming garden, open garden, are at the end of this video. All right, let's jump into some questions. So somebody said they were just asking questions about ground covers, and that's a video that'll be coming up. I have taken photos of dozens and dozens of ground covers. I want to do like a 50 ground cover video. Keep in mind that almost anything we're using as a ground cover has the potential to be aggressive. Obviously, there's scales to that aggressiveness. You know, English ivy, that Chinese bloodroot that Ram has in her garden that's run all over the place. There's some that you want to avoid, and I have a couple of them in this garden that probably, if you don't like to have any future potential issue, you'd probably want to avoid. So I'm going to do a video on this, but they were just saying types to be avoided because of root system interference. I don't think you're going to have a problem really with the roots on the ground covers causing problems. Typically, most ground cover things are for the shade. A lot of them are, but then there are some that will take full sun as well, sedums, and there are some full sun examples of ground covers, but a lot of our ground covers are very well adapted at crawling under and around other things. They're well adapted to that without causing a lot of issues for whatever they're growing near. And then they were just asking about if they strip nutrients. No, for the most part, no. When you think about plants stripping nutrients, and when we're talking about here, I'm talking about not nitrogen. Nitrogen changes by the day, but other nutrients that you'd have in the soil, micronutrients. Typically, when we're talking about stripping nutrients like that, we're talking about plants that you would be harvesting. So as an example, sweet potatoes can end up with boron deficiencies. They use a lot of boron, and you have to sometimes either have not grow sweet potatoes in the same field every year, or you have to add boron at some point to keep that boron deficiency from happening. So you can have a crop like that where you're taking the material out of the field. But for the most part, the things that we have in the ground are, even if they're using a lot of a nutrient, it's still there, right? It's just in potentially a different form. So I don't really worry about any particular plant stripping nutrients, unless again I was harvesting it and removing it, and then that nutrient was coming with me, in the fruit or the tuber or whatever I was harvesting, and then I can end up with those kinds of deficiencies. It's not something I'm worried about. I mean, for the most part, all the ground covers we have out here are lessening the amount we're having to mulch, holding some moisture in place. When it rains, it's a place where water can go into the ground easily. It traps the water there. and does a pretty good job of just lowering overall maintenance without causing really any issues, other than some of them can be aggressive, and no matter what kind of ground cover you're using, probably need to be prepared to have to tame it occasionally. That's why sometimes low growing shrubs are the best ground covers for some folks. If you know you're really adverse to having to do a lot of maintenance in the future, probably low doming shrubs like a dwarf Indian hawthorn there, or radiant abelia, this little pink abelia that I planted here, little meatball Thuja occidentalis back here. You know, little low growing shrubs may be the best thing for you to use as ground cover. Okay, well, I spent a lot of time on question 1. Let's see, black knight butterfly bush pruned. Okay, so they had a black knight butterfly bush. They pruned it in the late winter. It came out, it's already bloomed heavily. Now what? You can just deadhead butterfly bushes. I've got one back here behind the Empress of China dogwood. Somebody pointed out last week that in the past they saw the white flowers on this, and why were they green? They haven't actually colored up yet. So they, even a week removed from last week, it's a little whiter than it was, but it still hasn't fully colored up. I'm thinking that it's going to peak next week, and then the flowers are going to be falling off before the open garden. That'll be, so people won't see it in its peak. I think it'll happen between now and the 22nd. But there's a big butterfly bush behind it. If it starts to slow down, you can just deadhead it or just give it a general pruning again, and it'll flush right back out and start blooming again. But you will have ups and downs. These things that we say bloom all summer, you know, they're going to go through spikes and then drop-offs, you know, as it goes. Even the annuals that are in the ground right here. Steph and I are kind of doing the math. It's, you know, as I'm shooting this June 6th, and we have people coming on the 22nd to look at this garden, I'm probably past the math right now on being able to cut these salvia and have them come back into full bloom before the 22nd. It'd be a close call. So at this point, I would just deadhead individual spent spikes on some of these things. And then after people come on the 22nd, we'll probably give it more of a general haircut. And then have them all flush back out and come back into full bloom again. But yeah, we're doing the math on that. Just making sure things will be peak bloom, you know, when folks are showing up here. So somebody said, is it too late for plant tone or some sort of, you know, organic fertilizer that they're using? Plant tone, holly tone, holly. I said holly, and then, hey, come here, come here, come here. Holly, come, holly, come, holly, come. Why are you walking on stuff? Why are you walking on? This dog never walked on anything for years. Come here, come on, come on, come on, come on. Go back here behind me, okay? All right, come on, come on. Don't be walking on things, okay? People want to come and see the garden. They don't want to see the garden holly crushed. She never walked on anything. All of a sudden, she's just boom, 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 right on top of things. Good, she's following the path now. It's not too late to fertilize with an organic fertilizer in the early summer at all. So I would definitely, if you haven't fertilized or you want to re-fertilize, you absolutely could with an organic fertilizer. And why do I say organic fertilizer specifically? Is because organic fertilizers feed the microbes in the soil that take care of your plants. And it only really works on active life in the soil. So as the temperature, right now, we're kind of peak season, things are growing really quickly. You know, it hasn't gotten so hot that it's kind of gone into a dormancy. All that soil life is alive, and if you feed it right now, you know, it can use it and give it to the plants if the plants need it, or not if they don't. It'll just be there when it's needed. But what will happen later in the summer is that as the days get shorter and the nighttime temperatures start to drop a bit, you know, towards September, all the soil life, soil microbes start to slow down, you know, as it gets colder and colder, and they just stop using the fertilizer, you know, the organic fertilizer. So this organic fertilizer will not cause you a problem having put it down at the wrong time of year. You'll waste your money potentially putting it down in November or December when the soil microbes aren't active and can't use it. You know, it's kind of a waste of money, but you're not actually going to cause yourself a real issue having put it out at the wrong time. But right now it would be absolutely fine. But my point is, organic fertilizers are not going to mess you up in the same way that synthetic fertilizers have the potential to. Synthetic fertilizer, all the nutrients are already designed in a way that the plant, it bypasses the soil life, feeding the soil life, and just goes right to feeding your plants. Those are the types of fertilizers, if you put them down at the wrong time, can push growth on a plant when it doesn't necessarily want to be growing. So that's my argument for using organic fertilizers, is because you can't really make mistakes in the same way that you could with synthetic fertilizers. When the soil life is dormant in the wintertime, that fertilizer is just going to lay there until it can be used. Okay, somebody has a stinky rain barrel. Is it okay for watering the garden? I probably, I've watered plants with stagnant pond water in the past, and it's not the best water to put on things. Water that's just stood there for a long time, has a funky smell if you turn it over. I would imagine leaves and other material have gathered at the bottom of your rain barrel over time. They've snuck through whatever system you have from your gutters or whatever, and you've got organic material in the rain barrel that's causing that funkiness. So what I had to do on my pond was create I had to oxygenate the water. I had basically a bubbler out in the pond to oxygenate it, to get some life going, to break down the leaves and other organic material and fertilizers that were washing in there and all the other stuff that washes into a farm pond, to get that stuff broken down. And then I could actually see a response in my plants to having healthier water applied to my plants. I don't think you're probably going to hurt anything with a rain barrel of stinky water on most of your pots and things, but I could definitely see a difference in the growth of things with cleaner, better oxygenated water for sure. So what I would do is try to get that rain barrel flipped over and see if you can get it cleaned out and get back to collecting clean water again. Okay, let's see. And also, if it's open to the air, then obviously in that kind of stinky, stagnant water, you can get a lot of mosquitoes as well if you're not putting the little mosquito dunks in it. So somebody's had Leyland cypress blight killed 5 plants quickly. So there are a couple of fungal diseases that Leyland cypress get a lot of problems, but a couple of different fungal diseases, a canker, that can kill them very, very quickly. They have 5 stumps now. Somebody told them they were supposed to do something to get rid of the fungus. What can they do? I don't think you're going to get, what you just need to do is plant different plants there. You don't want to come back with Leyland cypress because the fungal disease that attacked the Leyland cypress is still there. But a lot of these things are pretty specific to, they're either very specific to the plants that they attack, or they only are able to attack plants that are in stressed conditions. So even if you put something back in the place of it that was susceptible to this same fungal disease, unless that plant was under some sort of stress, then it probably wouldn't get it anyway. Although sometimes taking something out of a container and cutting the roots on it open those roots up to a potential entry point for a fungal problem. So the process of planting them could make them exposed to that. So I just move over from conifers to some sort of leafy evergreen plant that's unlikely to get the same issue. That's what I would do. You're never going to kill this fungal problem in the ground, so I wouldn't even go down that road. Fungicides are the biggest waste of, I don't want to say a complete waste of time, but I just find them overall to be, there's another question coming up about, leaf spot on hydrangea macrophyllus. It's just, something that happens, right? Once you go down the road of spraying fungicides, copper fungicides or whatever, you're not actually killing the fungus. You're just pushing it back a bit, but it's just going to come right back. There's no controlling that kind of thing. You just need to put plants in that are resistant to that fungal that fungal pathogen and move on. And again, like I say, on those Leylands, they're became very susceptible to it, I think for several reasons. Number one, it's hot. Number two, we overplanted them. Number three, I think a lot of times we're taking inferior cuttings on things over a long period of time. Over a 30 or 40 year history of that plant, you get you're not getting the best cuttings taking on them. You got a dip in quality of the actual overall plant as well. So a lot of reasons potentially, and then they're overplanted. Holly's on a shorter and shorter time clock out here, and the heat, that's definitely something I'll mention for June 22nd. She won't be out a whole lot. She's struggling with her 15th summer for sure. Let's see. Again, and then leylands were just so overplanted everywhere. You know, we see this repeated, you know, when something becomes like a super popular screening plant, you know, then we see issues show up in them later on. And I'm fearful of like Shindo viburnum are going to go down that same, we're going to go down that same path with Shindo viburnum. I started growing Shindo viburnum a long time ago. Couldn't give them away in gallon pots to nurserymen and others. They just didn't know what it was. And then fast forward a decade, and now they're just like used everywhere. And I see entire gardens being boxed off with them. Sometimes when I'll give consultations and somebody wants something that's really to block an area that they want to block, you know, then and have a really low maintenance option, I'll say Shindo viburnum. But I always say, just plant 1 or 2 to block that spot. You don't have to put the whole thing in a fence. But I'm fearful that that plant is just going down that same road. And nurseries I go to, you know, they should call there's a couple nurseries I know of that should be called Shindo viburnum nursery, just because there's so many there. So you can see it long before it happens that something's going to go wrong with that when, you know, every 4th garden has the same plant being used as a screening plant. Okay, let's see. Person amended soil because beds are all clay. Plants are struggling. They feel like they created kind of a clay pot situation in the ground by amending it too much. Is there a bigger treatment they could have done to beds or to future beds? Again, I don't really till clay soils, and I think there's something about tilling coming up in one of these questions as well. I don't really till a lot of organic matter down into clay soils. You never see me do that just because you can create a really swampy situation. And I did this is personal experience, having tilled clay, a lot of organic material into clay soils and then have it rain for like several weeks and it just become just a swampy kind of mess. I'd always prefer to amend them from top down. So for me, rather than mixing something into the soil, and I've got a clay planting video where I show using all the things not to use, not to use any of those bagged products that have fertilizer in them, none of those garden soils or planting soils. You know, if you have access to pine bark soil conditioner, it's perfectly fine to mix it out into clay, and it's what the plants are being grown in that you're purchasing. Maybe a little bit of compost, but for this garden, we put down a layer of compost and then we put down some wood chips in the back. And I didn't have to put that compost down because the wood chips would have also become compost. So that you don't have to do both those layers, but if you do the wood chips, let them break down, it becomes a compost layer. Or fast forwarding, if you don't have access to wood chips, you can just put the compost down, and then that little bit of compost gets mixed in each time I plant a plant, right? So it's there on the top, and just by being there, it's getting mixed down in the soil, but it's a small amount of compost. I don't want to put a tremendous amount of organic material down in the ground in this clay soil, because it will become boggy and stagnant. You're basically creating a clay pot down in the ground that now has all of this potentially peat moss or whatever other things are in those bags that have a wicking effect, and they're wicking up all that water that runs easily into those holes and potentially causing problems. Not always, some people, this person won't have that problem and this person will. But I've called those garden soils, those all of those bags, those pallet after pallet after pallet of garden soil that have contained fertilizer, and we won't mention any companies here. I've called that stuff death in a bag for 20 years. You can check with people at the farmer's market. Since the beginning of those bags, I've called that stuff death in a bag. That's what it is, it's death in a bag. The more of that material you use, the more potential issues you have with some of your plants, because if you're mounding that stuff way up in raised beds, or you're using it down in a clay-based soil, you have the potential to swamp things, drown things not have access to nutrients plants not have access to actual nutrients that they need in the future. Fertilizer being in a bag at a time of year when you're not supposed to be using a fertilizer. I answered that question about plant tone. Well, the plant tone's no problem to put down, but even in October or November, it's just not going to be good money spent because their soil microbes aren't alive to actually use it. Or they're alive, but they're just dormant, or they're in a slowing down at that time of year. But if you put down synthetic fertilizer October, November, and one of those death in a bag products that I won't mention the names you know, those things are, you know, going to push your plants at times that they don't need to be pushed. So I just don't want any of that garden soil that has fertilizer added. I don't think they're a good idea for most people's gardens. I took a long sidetrack there, but back to their question. For future beds, I would either put down some thin layer of compost, or if you have access to wood chips, I would just put down the thick layer of wood chips and then wait 6 months, you know, to plant in them for that material to break down and get your soil going again. And then when you dig a hole, a little bit of that material will get mixed in. Not the big chunky wood, but once it's been broken down, a little bit of that material, just an adequate amount, will get mixed in, and that's all you really need. The clay is as big of a pain as it is for us, I've said many, many times. It's actually the plants themselves, if they can get their roots down into it a bit, it's got everything they need. You know, the organic material and the fungi up here that, you know, the beneficial fungi, bacteria that I'm keeping alive up in this upper mulch level in the upper part of that clay are helping, and then the roots further down in that clay have all the nutrients in them. So everything's working together that way. But from the top down, don't till it in, and don't go crazy mixing in garden soil or whatever the stuff is called. You know the bags I'm talking about in every box store that it's almost hard to buy something without fertilizer in it now because of that stuff. Okay, somebody bought acanthus after I showed it, but read it can be aggressive. Any concerns? Yeah, acanthus can go from waiting for it 3 years to bloom to ours is blooming back there. I imagine the next year I'll probably have to add some control to it. So yes, there acanthus over on NC State's campus, the prettiest little stand of it, which I think got torn out because there was so much construction going on, was in a contained kind of concrete space. So it can spread. I've got mine in its 3rd year is eating a hydrangea and a couple other things out there. My neighbor's walking out, watching me talking to a camera as always. This question comes up almost every week. Somebody planted shrubs in the spring and they have no growth at all. Just, you know, you got to be patient. Sometimes, again, there's this thing where sometimes I can put something in the ground and it just immediately starts growing, and then something else will go in the ground, again, like that acanthus that I talked about. It took 3 years for that to really perform in the garden, and depending on the plants you're putting in, it can depend on the plants you're putting, the type of plants you're putting them in, the time of year it was, some dumb luck that occurred. It got hot fast, it got cold fast, it got too wet, it got too dry. There's like all of these factors that go into this that are out of our control, and mainly though the type of plant you're putting in the ground that can decide how much growth you're going to get at that particular timing. And sometimes, again, I'll put something in the ground and it just starts growing like crazy. Then I'll put something in the ground and go, ooh, that thing seems touch and go, and it might be touch and go for a year or more. And then it starts to come out of that and starts growing, or I move it, you know, at that point. But definitely patience is a lot of gardening. Gardening is patience. Probably need to make that t-shirt. Gardening is patience. Somebody bought a butterfly Japanese maple. It's got 2 trunks basically from 12 inches from the ground, 12 inches above the graft, or it's 2 trunks coming up. They want to know how to train it into a single leader and how to choose which one. I would just go over to it and see which of those 2 main leaders is more likely to be, you know, to be the one that will stand up big and tall and straight, right? I can go into this native blueberry, and I can bend one of these limbs and say, oh, that one is a candidate to bend straight if I wanted to try to tree form this blueberry, which I actually saw at a nursery. I went to a nursery, they were trying to tree form everything. So they had one of everything in the nursery. They were making tree forms out of them, just experimenting. And this This blueberry was one of them that was in that group, but there's a branch right there that I could stake straight. So I would just go over to it, see which one is easier to stand up straight, and then I'd get a bamboo stake or some sort of wood stake and stake it straight, or metal stake, doesn't really matter. And stake that one straight, and you can continue to leave that other leader on for a while if you want to, or you can go ahead and cut it off. But I would just let the plant kind of tell you which one is easier to bend up into place without breaking. You know, you don't want to damage, you know, you're not trying to cause damage to it. So somebody said, is it too late to pinch back fall blooming perennials like autumn joy sedum, mums, aster, solidago, anemones, joe pye weed? They didn't ask about all those, but those are the kind of the list of these fall blooming perennials. My Joe Pye weed, Joe Pye weed's trying to bloom everywhere right now. It's gone super early. I've seen a lot of solidago showing color already, fall blooming solidago. It's a weird year for sure on the timing of things blooming. You know, Caryopteris and almost full bloom over there right here at the beginning of June. But no, typically you have until about now or up until about the 4th of July to cut some of those fall blooming perennials a bit, which will keep them fuller. Sometimes autumn joy sedum and some of the fall blooming sedum even fall blooming salvias can get really leggy and floppy by fall. So it's not a bad idea in the late spring, early summer, just to give them just to pinch the top out of them. Basically, it'll branch them and give you more flowers in the fall. And that includes mums that maybe mums that you've planted that you bought from garden centers in the past, the little formal mums, or the better perennial fall blooming mums. All of those things can be cut in the early summer. And that's the kind of thing that's in the weekly garden planner. So if you're thinking about buying the weekly garden planner, and again, there's a discount down below this video, that's the kind of thing that's in the weekly garden planner. There's a video on this either last week or this week or the next week in the June garden planner, where we would have talked about, hey, you're right at the end of the time where you can prune these fall blooming perennials to get them bigger, better, fuller, and not be flopping over when they're blooming in the fall. So that's the kind of thing that's in the weekly garden planner. Somebody said, why do we never have weeds? Oh, we have weeds. I can see some crabgrass coming up in the bed over here and along the sidewalk. So several things. We got them under control right off the bat. I took the mower here initially and I just set it to the lowest setting, and I mowed everything completely flat, and then we composted and did the wood chips, and most everything died from that. But I have neighbor invading weeds. I have all of these. There's a mulberry here, a Chinese privet there, and a Japanese privet on the city's property back here, and English ivy on a neighboring property back there. They're dropping seeds in here. So I've got those I'm always going to be fighting, plus a few others. So it's not that we don't have weeds, but what we try to do is get them out of here before they have a chance to flower and seed. So you're trying to reduce your seed bank that's in the ground. That's what we're trying to do. So over the course of 4 years, we have less and less and less weeds. So we have managed to get it under control, but there's a 7-gallon bucket over at the corner of the house over there that Steph or I will go around and fill up, every few days. We'll just walk around and pull some. But there's a bucket over there just ready for it, and you just say, hey, I want to fill this bucket, once a week or something like that, and you can keep it under control. Again, it's a very small garden too, so it's much easier. I say this, it's much easier in a small garden like this than it would be in other places. But we are just absolutely surrounded and inundated by pretty nasty, noxious, invasive plants and noxious weeds for sure. But there's a very low number of weeds out here, but it's because we're staying on top of it. That's the main thing. Don't let them come to seed and make more seed, for next year. Okay, so somebody has honeysuckle with bare stems at the base, about 4 feet up. How do they promote new growth at the base? Any top pruning you do on it is liable to create suckering down at the bottom. But one thing I'd like to point out is almost all vines, it doesn't matter what it is, are going to become woody down at the bottom and not have very much growth on them. So any vine you see growing up, if you see a vine way up in a tree somewhere, if you track it down to the bottom, it's in all likelihood going to have big old, the part of the vine near the ground is not going to have any foliage on it. It's just going to be woody like that. But again, you can prune on it some at the top to encourage some growth at the bottom. But a lot of times they won't leaf out from the old stem. They'll start to put up new pieces by doing that. But vines are going to get woody eventually down at the bottom. It's just kind of in their nature to do that. But most respond to pruning, you know, from the top. Does Vitex rebloom if you deadhead it? Yeah, you can definitely deadhead your Vitex and continue to have it branch and rebloom, just like butterfly bushes. Vitex are much longer blooming than crepe myrtles. We have crepe myrtles like the white Natchez is blooming now. You'll get Natchez and Muskogee will bloom super early in the crepe myrtle world, and then the others will bloom later in the season. And I think it creates this this thought in people's minds that crepe myrtles bloom all summer. There are crepe myrtles blooming all summer, but not individual crepe myrtles for the most part. Most of them peak bloom at the time that they peak bloom, and then they have a few residuals. Whereas my Vitex will get started, and if I do a little deadheading or do a little pruning on it, I can keep it blooming pretty much, you know, all summer long. This is the reason I picked this spot to film this little bit. The serviceberry behind me was planted in a spot where the red maple was taken out. And I said in a video recently, I've got it staked back here. That stump was ground, and it was ground pretty well, but there's enough wood still under the ground that the ground is settling 4 years later. And because of that settling, the tree was leaning during the winter time. And I have it staked up over there with a pretty heavy stake, but somebody has this same exact issue going on. And then the question is, should they stake it, which I've done. I was able just to pull the tree back up and stake it with a really, really heavy stake in the ground and get away with that? Or should they have it taken out, the space refilled, and then replanted? Should they, you know, all kinds of, I don't know without seeing it. That's the problem. If I'd have pulled back this thing and realized there was a big void underneath it, I would either try to fill that void with soil, or at that point, maybe I have to figure out if I can dig it out, reduce the top on it, and then dig it out and raise it, or, you know, maybe grind the stump more and then put it back in. I don't know, just based on, it's completely based on the situation that I'm looking at. I think though, you can probably pull it up straight and then tuck some soil back underneath it if you need to and get away with that, as long as you stake it well at that point. Because if it's able to just do this, you know, all summer long, it's just gonna rip its own roots over and over and over again. As it tries to put on new roots, they're gonna rip and shred. You gotta get it staked well. But I have that same, weirdly, the same exact issue. Took a tree out, left part of the stump, because when they're grinding the stump, it appears that they're doing it really well, but they can't see it. After a while, that material builds up and they can't see what they've ground or what they haven't ground. And then the ground ends up settling over some period of time. And then whatever you've planted back on top of it, if it's shrubs, it's no big deal. They'll adapt to it, right? But a tree can just go, what is happening? The ground is disappearing. And then, you know, you got to fix it in some way. But again, I haven't seen theirs, so I don't know the condition, but I was able to stake mine. There you go. Somebody just planted a dogwood and the placing isn't the best. Can they move it now or wait until September? 6B, New Jersey. If you just planted it, you can absolutely go out there and move the thing to a better location, especially if it's going to be under stress where you put it the rest of the summer. It seems wise to go ahead and move it. If you're not comfortable with it, yeah, you can wait till October and move it at that point. Here's my Summertime Blues Vitex coming into flower. And again, after that first round of flowering, if I want to prune it, I can definitely get more. I moved to this spot because, of course, I got a redbud question this week, because again, I can call this channel Wood Chips with Jim Putnam, or I could call it Redbuds with Jim Putnam, because it seems like all of these new redbuds have so many questions. Their Ruby Falls broke off, I don't know how high or low on the plant, and they wanted to know about staking it. This Golden Falls Redbud has that same stake that's on the Amelanchier out in the front. It's about 2-inch round circle stake. They have them in the fencing section, or with the fencing stuff at Lowe's. They're, you know, kind of they're stakes that have a point on the end of them, and they're round, and they're, I guess, 8 feet tall. This one's, about 1.5 feet down in the ground. But this Golden Falls Redbud is permanently staked, and it's on a very heavy stake, a stake that's much bigger than the diameter of the plant. But, I don't see a day when this thing's not gonna be staked. If I take it off the stake, I think it's gonna end up with weird leans and all kinds of stuff. But, I call this the cousin it tree, but it's so straight because it's staked. I don't think it'd be this straight without it. So that's what I would do, is put a heavy stake on it and then start to restake a piece on your Ruby Falls back up to the height that you want it to be. You can see this tree has not grown. This tree, when I bought it, this was about the height it was. It may have been about 6 feet. This tree's probably added less than a foot in height since I've had it, but I've limbed it off the ground 8 times. Just recently, in a video 2 weeks ago, it got limbed up, or a week ago it got limbed up. Somebody has Hosta in Raleigh that's growing fast. When can they divide it? Could they plant Hosta in grow bags and then grow it in grow bags so that they can divide it later? Yeah, you can absolutely grow Hosta in grow bags and then use it later. Keep in mind, grow bags during the summer, though, here in the South, dry out really, really, really quickly, because in a plastic container, the water can't get out through the plastic walls. It can only get out through the holes in the bottom and the surface area on the top and the plant using the water, right? There's 3 ways that water can get out. With one of those grow bags, and I've got my potatoes in grow bags over there, the water can get out every single direction. The plant's using the water can go out the top, it can go out the sides, it can go out the bottom. They use a lot of water. So keep that in mind, they will be dry. And then when to divide Hosta, you can divide Hosta pretty much anytime you want. And I have a video on dividing Hosta on the channel. Some people will divide them as they're coming back up in the spring. Some people will divide them in the fall as they've gone dormant, but they can still see them a bit. That's true with a lot of perennials where they've died back, but you can still see the foliage, so you can still dig them out without damaging them. Same thing with like daffodil bulbs are that way too. Once the foliage is about 2/3 died back, you can dig them out and move them or divide them or whatever. It's got all the energy it needs back down into the bulb, but you still left enough that you can see where to dig. But you can divide them. I think you can divide Hosta whenever, but if you're asking me, the best times would be during the cooler times of the year to definitely not harm them. But I've taken Hosta out of the ground and left it on a workbench for, basically 2 days in the process of dividing them and replanting them, and they're pretty tough plants. Okay, this is a good question. Somebody planted an azalea. They planted it high up in Richmond, Virginia, like I've shown. They added soil conditioner. The rain has washed some of the soil away where they mounded the soil up to the edge of it. And I've got this little, I don't think you'll be able to see it, but there's roots exposed on this little boxwood that I planted between the Redbud and this Luton Rouge barberry, and I can see the roots on it. I planted it up high and on purpose, and then the mulch or soil or whatever has washed away from it. I'm gonna remulch a little bit. I'm just gonna put down a very thin layer of decorative mulch for people coming on the 22nd between now and then, and I'll just throw some of that mulch, up to the edge of that root ball to recover it. I'm not gonna worry about it. I've got a couple other plants back there in the wood chips where I can see the exposed roots on the top, but I'd rather have those exposed roots on the top than I would not be able to see them at all. So there's a delicate balance there. If I planted it to the point where I couldn't see any of the top of the root ball, I'd be scared that I planted it too deep. So I'd rather have that scenario, and then each time I mulch, I can cover it up just a bit without burying it too much. Okay, so somebody asked me my opinion on coconut coir plantable pots. This person doesn't like them. So a lot of plants being grown in pots that are supposed to be more environmentally friendly. So you can plant the pot directly in the ground. So it might be a pot made of peat moss, might be made of coconut coir, might be made of just paper, other paper products, which I think I would like. Probably if we were going to do environmentally friendly pots, I think they should be paper-based because trees are one of our actual renewable resources. It's amazing. You can cut a tree down, you can make paper, toilet paper, houses, and all kinds of things, and then replant the tree and it just grows right back. I mean, it is truly, you know, a gift that was given, you know, in our ability to be able to use them and then replant them, as long as we're replanting them and we're not clear cutting and causing erosion problems and all those kinds of things that the timber industry could cause. We've gotten better at all those things, and trees are a great renewable resource for us to be using. And I think that's, you know, we use less and less paper because of computers and the internet. So we have a ton of trees planted in the Southeast that were supposed to, you know, that were planted, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that are here for us, you know, to use. So it seems like if we're going to make pots, you know, let's make them out of something that we can just immediately plant back in the ground and reuse. And so I'm just going to give you my overall opinion on coconut coir, just in general, okay? It is strange to me that, you know, because people want to use less peat moss, that we've replaced it with coconut, with the coconut fiber as some sort of environmental improvement. It is not an environmental improvement to take a coconut that was grown in the along the equator somewhere around the earth, take that material from that coconut, dry it out, because you're going to have to dry it out to reduce the weight on it so that you can ship it inexpensively. Then you're going to grind it up in some way, compress it into a bale, wrap it in plastic, and then ship it on a ship using diesel fuel or whatever they're using for that ship, and ship it to America, put it on a diesel truck, take it to a garden center, and sell it to someone and go, hey man, this is good for the environment, is a weird version of good for the environment, in Jim's opinion. Again, these are Jim's opinion. It's obviously those coconuts should just be ground, turned into mulch, the extra part of the coconut, and mulch those coconut fields right where they are and put those nutrients right back at the base of those trees. Just my opinion. And then if we're going to use environmentally friendly pots here in the United States, let's use byproduct materials from the lumber industry and from paper industry, and, you know, and use them as mulches like we're doing, and, you know, make paper pots that we can reuse. And so that's just Jim's opinion. Again, I don't think peat bogs in Canada or coconuts in the tropics are, I think, I call them false feel-good environmentalism, you know, is what I feel like. We have a way to do this better. And right here in the Southeast United States, or in the Pacific Northwest, where we have lumber, and we can replant those trees, and they will amazingly grow back for us, and when we can reuse them again, because that's what they're great for. Let's see, and that's an opinion, another opinion by Jim. Opinions aren't good to give on the internet, right? Let's see, do white foliage hostas need more or less sun or shade? Yes, definitely. The whiter they are, the more shade that they need to be in. Again, I talked about last week, there's definitely variability. Most of these hostas are hardy from zone 3 to 9. And so in zone 3, most all of them can probably go out in full sun, obviously depending on the area. But, you know, as you get into warmer areas, they need more and more shade regardless. But the white ones are probably going to need shade even up into the coldest areas of the country, for sure. And then somebody asked if Green Hill Hostas is open to the public. Yes. But you need to call them. It's been a couple years since we went up there, but some of our hosta came from Green Hill Hostas, and he introduced a lot of the hosta that are out in the trade, some of the better ones that are out in the trade. Interesting. It was an interesting visit up there, just above Wake Forest, North Carolina. So somebody asked if you can use pine needles instead of sulfur on their hydrangeas to lower the pH if they're trying to manipulate it. Pine straw actually weirdly does not lower your pH all that much. It just doesn't. Most everything compost toward neutral. So pine needles are extremely acidic. Like right off the tree, right off the pine tree, they're extremely acidic. So you assume that you take something that's that acidic and you use it as a mulch under things, that it's going to change the pH. But almost everything when it composts toward neutral. So it'll if that pine needle's 3.5 when it came off the tree, by the time it composts, it's near 7, and it's not going to have any impact on the pH of your soil. The pH of your soil was determined with rainfall over thousands and thousands of years. And again, here's the map of the pH map for the country, and you can see the areas that have acid soils are areas where it rains regularly. That is the determining factor on, more than anything else. There are other factors, how much lime is in the rock that's in the area, and there's all kinds of factors for pH. But the biggest determining factor is over eons of rainfall in the areas that get more rainfall, those soils are more acid. Pine straw is not going to change that at all, and nothing you do is really going to change it. You can lime to raise it and sulfur to lower it, but it's going to always settle back toward what it was before. We got the soil test back for the Wallace farm space, and I'll go over that in a video. We'll go back down there and during the month of July sometime and talk about the soil test from down there. Somebody said the best mulch for slopes, and that's probably related to the pine needle question right before it. So if you have pine straw in your area, pine straw, although it's not my favorite, just kind of overall mulch, I have spread more bales of pine straw and loaded more pine straw in this life than a good portion of people watching. I spent my 16, 17 years old, I loaded on a Saturday at the garden center in North Raleigh, hundreds and hundreds of bales of pine straw a day. On a Saturday, we would just load hundreds of bales, and then I would deliver it. I would go there after high school. I'd drive up to Rake and Hoe Garden Center, load 40 bales. I had a technique for loading 40 bales into the full-size pickup, and I'd deliver 40 bales. I'd come back, load 40 bales. And then as a landscaper, I worked for a company that had a lot of the apartments in Cary. And in January, February, we would get tractor trailers of pine straw, all these apartment complexes all over the triangle. And then as a landscaper, pine straw. I have touched a lot of pine straw in this life. Pine straw, although it's not my favorite mulch, I don't think it improves the soil as readily or as quickly as some of these wood mulches and bark-based mulches do. It still, it does a good job of covering the ground, it does a lot of the other benefits, hopefully reducing some weeds, and holding soil in place and regulating soil temperature. It does a lot of those things. It just doesn't break down into a layer of humus that I'm trying to create on top of the ground as readily. It just takes eons of using that material to gain any kind of black dirt up at the top of your existing soil. Okay, but with that said, it's great for slopes because pine straw tends to wrap it on itself and it holds in place better. Obviously, there's water that can go down a slope that can wash anything away, but pine straw is probably number one, and then the triple shredded hardwood mulch that I use, and because it's varying sizes of materials. If you're looking at a bag or a bulk product and you see a consistency in the size and shape of the material, okay, if all the bits kind of look alike, that would be like the wood chips that I use in the paths out here. If the chips are kind of the similar size, that stuff's going to wash away because it can't lock together. So these wood chips stay loose here on the ground. I can reach down here on my path and just pick up a handful of them, just like that. And you see how easily that would wash away? But this hardwood mulch over here is matted down because it has different size material. So that's what we're looking for, is different sizes and shapes of material that can kind of lock themselves together. Pine straw is best. Triple shredded or double shredded hardwood would be probably second best. Okay, opinion on coconut coir, sulfur, best, okay. All right, we're up to question 23. So their veggies, the only option they have is grow bags. What soil blend is best? And does it depend on each vegetable? I think it depends more on where you live in the country as to what I would use in a grow bag to grow my vegetables. So if I was in Phoenix, Arizona, or Los Angeles, or someplace where during the summertime I was going to be doing all the watering, I would use something that holds more water. So more compost if you were using back to peat moss or coconut or whatever you're using, I would lean toward those those organic materials that hold more moisture, right? But here in the Southeast, where we could potentially get lots and lots of rain over some period of time, I would start to mix in a little bit of pine bark into that so that I could create some additional drainage or expanded slate or something into that material so I could get some drainage in it. So I think it depends on where you live. You just don't want them boggy for any period of time, but you also don't want to be wasting water if you live in the Southwest and you just know it's not going to rain for a 6-month window every year. So again, it depends on where I lived as to what blend I would go with. In wetter areas, I would lean toward compost with a little more bark in it so that I could drain that just a little bit better. And I think it'll be year to year you'll learn because I've learned with the grow bags over there, I put too much bark. The first year I thought I used all compost and I just thought it was staying too wet. So the next year I got really, really smart, and I mixed a bunch of pine bark in it. And then they were so dry, I couldn't water them fast enough, and we barely got any potatoes last year compared to the year before. So I learned a lesson year over year over year, and this year I backed off on the pine bark, but I added just a little. I still added a little because I remembered it being too wet from 2 years ago. So I think you're gonna learn a lot in time, and I know that's not helpful sometimes, but I don't think anybody's gonna grow the best vegetable garden the first year, or the best herb garden, or the best anything, or the best house plants, or anything the first time. You're gonna learn from it. So will flower seeds unused be okay to plant next season? Some will, some won't. The germination rate drops year to year, and so seeds carried over from year to year. Let's say I mentioned Wyatt corals last week, and somebody said sounded like I was saying white corals because of my accent. It's Wyatt corals. They sell seed. It's Wyatt Coral Seed Company. They sell seed in packets to garden centers and others to resell. At the end of the season, they have to recertify that seed if they're carrying it over to next year. They'll have to retest the germination on it, and then they can get a stamp on it for the following year. So you can carry seed over year to year, but it has to be, you have to germinate 10 or 20 seeds out of the pack and make sure that the germination rate hasn't fallen. So with that said, this depends all on the type of plants it is. There are plants whose seeds are probably viable for 100+ years, and plants that only have viable seed for maybe 3 to 5 years. Completely evolutionary thing. It's different from plant to plant. Some plants, the germination rates on the seed is going to drop off really quickly over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You're going to be losing 50% a year germination rate. And then other seed, man, you can keep them in a jar for 5 years and put them in and germinate at the same rate they did 5 years ago. So it depends on the plant. But yes, the germination rate will drop over time. It just has a different clock for different seeds. But make sure you're storing them dry. That's for sure. Okay, last thing from this week, and then we'll talk about the open house that's coming up. Somebody, and there were just a lot of kind words from last week overall when I talked about not flying here, to see this small urban garden. And somebody said that, they'd walk from Texas. There were just all kinds of nice things. Somebody said, could they buy a couple of shirts for, that we could give away during the thing? Just all kinds of really nice comments that I want to acknowledge, because I do have an incredible audience, watching these videos. And the thing, the only thing, to do for us, I mean, we sell the Learn to Garden video series, we sell the weekly garden planner, and we sell t-shirts. And then, you guys watching the videos, that's plenty for us. So thank you very much for, again, all your kind words. Okay. Reviewing the open garden that we're going to have on June 22nd. So the June 21st and 22nd, we're going to do 3 to 7 on June 21st, which is Friday. Hopefully just mostly local folks can come, and then, they can check it off their list on Friday, and then on Saturday, people that are maybe driving from further out, can have the garden at that point. We'll do giveaways on Friday and Saturday. Other things to do in the area. I've talked about the fact that I sold at this farmer's market in Raleigh for 20 years. It's pretty epic. I mean, when you think about farmers markets, maybe in your area, you're thinking about a market that's open on a Wednesday and maybe Saturday that pops up with little tents. Our farmers market is on a different scale here in Raleigh. It's got to be one of the bigger farmers markets in the country. There's an incredible number of vendors there. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth going to. The Raleigh Rose Garden is walkable from our house here. That beloved garden is in the neighborhood as well, that we showed off in a video. Eventually we're going to do a video over there with her. Duke Gardens, which was in a video last week, is definitely something to see. The Ralston is right up the road. It's not walkable. It is, but you wouldn't want to on a hot summer day. But the Ralston is close to us. The North Carolina Botanical Garden is in Chapel Hill. And the Art Museum, we have Raleigh downtown is close by, which is always fun to adventure to. But the Art Museum is close to us, and it has a beautiful garden as well. The Art Museum really has an impressive open space to see. And then the garden, again, will be open on Friday from 3 to 7, and then on Saturday from 8 to 3, 21st and 22nd. We're asking people not to park on Harris Street. This is 709 Harris Street. Let's leave Harris Street available to folks that maybe have some mobility issues. And then park on any of the adjoining streets and just walk over if you're able to. There's no charge, there's no fee for being here. We'll have t-shirts for sale, and again, more t-shirts than we currently have. I'm wearing my Elon t-shirt. I'm realizing now I didn't put on one of my t-shirts. My son went to Elon. I'm realizing 2 weeks ago I wore a camp t-shirt, one of my favorite bands, in the Sunday Q&A. So, you know, no telling. I just walked out and this is what I had on. Okay, it's rain or shine. We'll have giveaways. Holly will be limited on her coming outside just because she's 15. And one other thing two other places I would add real quick. The downtown Cary, North Carolina, has an incredible park downtown, and Patrick McMillan is now the horticulture director over there. He's one of the top horticulture folks in America, and he's got that park is definitely worth seeing. It's definitely on a different level than you would expect from a city park. And then Pullen Park is close by as well, and it's got some old-timey rides and things like that. It's a very popular place to go in Raleigh as well. So there's some of the other things you can do in Raleigh if you are traveling here. And we look forward to seeing everyone, and thank you so much. Ask gardening questions in the comment section down below this video, and we'll pick from those next week. Thanks for watching.